What if the very behaviors that look like discipline, healthy eating, or self-control on the surface are actually signs of a deeper struggle happening inside the brain and body? What if constantly restricting food, obsessing over calories, binge eating late at night, or feeling trapped in a cycle of guilt and overeating isn't simply about willpower? Because that's what many people have been told. Just eat less. Just have more self-control. Just stop overeating. Just eat normally. But eating disorders are far more complex than that, and understanding the underlying physiology can completely change how we think about them. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Eating is one of the most fundamental biological behaviors humans possess. Every cell in your body depends on energy. Every hormone relies on nutrients. Every organ system requires fuel. The brain itself consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy, despite representing only a small percentage of total body weight. As a result, the nervous system has evolved incredibly powerful mechanisms to regulate hunger, fullness, food-seeking behavior, reward, and metabolism. When those systems become disrupted, whether through genetics, stress, dieting, trauma, social pressures, hormonal changes, sleep deprivation, or nutritional deficiencies, the relationship with food can begin to change. Sometimes that disruption leads to excessive restriction, as seen in anorexia nervosa. Sometimes it leads to cycles of binge eating and compensatory behaviors, as seen in bulimia nervosa. And sometimes it leads to recurrent episodes of overeating accompanied by distress and loss of control, known as binge eating disorder. Importantly, these are not simply lifestyle choices. They are serious medical and psychological conditions involving complex interactions between the brain, metabolism, hormones, emotions, and behavior. What the research shows is that eating disorders have among the highest mortality rates of all psychiatric illnesses. Not only because of the physical consequences, but because prolonged disruptions in nutrition can affect nearly every system in the body: heart function, hormone production, bone density, immune health, cognitive performance, mood regulation, and overall longevity. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine the body's energy regulation system as a sophisticated thermostat. Its job is to maintain balance. When food intake drops too low, the body activates mechanisms designed to increase hunger and conserve energy. When intake rises excessively, other regulatory systems become activated. Eating disorders often involve disruptions in this thermostat. The body's signals become distorted, overridden, or difficult to interpret. As a result, behaviors that seem irrational from the outside often make sense when viewed through the lens of physiology and neuroscience. In today's discussion, we're going to explore what healthy eating truly means, how eating disorders develop, what happens inside the brain and body during anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating, and most importantly, what science tells us about recovery and restoring a healthy relationship with food. We'll also discuss practical strategies that support metabolic health, emotional resilience, and long-term well-being. If this is helpful so far, consider subscribing. I post content like this every day focused on science-based tools for optimizing health, metabolism, performance, and longevity. Because understanding food isn't just about weight, it's about understanding one of the most important biological relationships you'll ever have. Before we discuss anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating, we first need to understand what healthy eating actually means. Because in today's world, many people have become confused about nutrition. One week, carbohydrates are considered harmful. The next week, they're essential. One diet promotes extreme restriction. Another encourages complete freedom. Social media often turns nutrition into a battle of opposing beliefs. As a result, many people lose sight of the fundamental biological purpose of eating. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Food is information. Food is fuel. Food is also a signal. Every meal sends messages throughout the body. Those messages influence insulin, blood sugar, cortisol, leptin, ghrelin, thyroid hormones, sex hormones, brain chemistry, energy production, and even mood. Healthy eating is not simply about consuming fewer calories, nor is it about eating perfectly. From a physiological perspective, healthy eating means consistently providing the body with sufficient energy, essential nutrients, and appropriate signals to support optimal function. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your body as a high-performance vehicle. The goal isn't simply to use as little fuel as possible. The goal is to provide the right fuel in the right amounts at the right times. If you consistently underfuel the engine, performance declines. If you flood the system with poor quality fuel, performance also declines. Health exists somewhere between those extremes. What the research shows is that successful long-term nutrition is rarely about perfection. Instead, it revolves around consistency, adequacy, flexibility, and balance. This is particularly important because the body has evolved powerful mechanisms to defend against starvation. When energy intake becomes chronically restricted, the brain interprets this as a potential threat to survival. In response, numerous physiological adaptations occur. Metabolic rate may decrease, hunger hormones increase, energy expenditure declines, food thoughts become more frequent, exercise recovery worsens, and stress hormone levels may rise. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of biology working exactly as intended. Now let's discuss one of the biggest misconceptions surrounding healthy eating. Many people believe healthy eating should feel like constant control, but healthy eating is actually characterized by flexibility. A healthy relationship with food allows for nourishment without obsession, awareness without anxiety, structure without rigidity. Food should support life, not become the center of life. Another important principle involves metabolic health. The body functions best when blood sugar regulation remains relatively stable. This doesn't require eliminating entire food groups. Instead, it often means prioritizing protein, fiber-rich foods, fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, and minimally processed foods while maintaining overall dietary balance. Sleep also plays a critical role. Poor sleep increases hunger hormones, reduces satiety signals, and can increase cravings for highly palatable foods. In many cases, people interpret these changes as lack of willpower when they are actually experiencing predictable physiological responses. Now, here's the key takeaway. Healthy eating is not about eating less. It's not about earning food. And it's not about achieving perfection. Healthy eating is about consistently supporting the body's biological needs while maintaining psychological flexibility and emotional well-being. Understanding that foundation is critical because many eating disorders begin when healthy habits gradually shift into unhealthy extremes, and that's exactly what we'll explore next. Now let's discuss one of the most serious and misunderstood eating disorders, anorexia nervosa. Many people view anorexia simply as extreme dieting, but from a medical and neuroscience perspective, anorexia is far more complex. It's not merely a desire to lose weight. It's a condition involving profound changes in brain function, metabolism, reward processing, and body perception. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Under normal circumstances, the brain is designed to protect against starvation. When food intake decreases significantly, powerful survival mechanisms become activated. Hunger increases, food becomes more rewarding, energy conservation mechanisms switch on. The body essentially says, we need fuel, find food. But in anorexia nervosa, something unusual appears to occur. Research suggests that certain neural circuits involved in reward, anxiety, and behavioral control may respond differently than expected. For some individuals, food restriction itself may become reinforcing. Instead of hunger automatically driving eating behavior, restrictive patterns can become increasingly entrenched. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine the brain's hunger system is like a car's fuel warning light. Normally, when fuel becomes low, the warning light becomes impossible to ignore. You stop what you're doing and find a gas station. In anorexia, the warning light may still be flashing, but competing brain circuits can override the signal. The biological need remains, but the behavioral response becomes disrupted. Over time, this creates serious consequences throughout the body. What the research shows is that prolonged caloric restriction affects nearly every physiological system. The body enters a conservation mode. Metabolism slows, heart rate often decreases, blood pressure may fall, body temperature regulation becomes impaired, hormone production declines, and energy is redirected away from functions considered less essential for immediate survival. One of the most affected systems is the endocrine system. In females, reproductive hormones often decrease substantially, sometimes leading to loss of menstrual cycles. In males, testosterone levels may decline. Thyroid function frequently becomes suppressed. The body's priority shifts toward conserving energy rather than optimizing performance or reproduction. Now let's discuss the brain. The brain requires a continuous supply of energy to function properly. When energy availability remains chronically low, concentration often worsens, cognitive flexibility declines, mood disturbances become more common, anxiety frequently increases, and obsessive thoughts about food may intensify. Ironically, the very restriction intended to create control often produces greater mental preoccupation with food. This phenomenon was demonstrated clearly in classic starvation research, where healthy individuals subjected to prolonged calorie restriction became increasingly focused on food, recipes, meals, and eating-related thoughts. In other words, The brain responds to insufficient nutrition by making food more mentally important. This is not weakness, it's biology. Now, here's something critically important. Recovery from anorexia is not simply about eating more. Nutritional rehabilitation is essential, but recovery also involves addressing psychological, emotional, behavioral, and neurological factors. The brain itself needs adequate energy to heal. This is why evidence-based treatment often includes medical care, nutritional support, psychotherapy, family support, and ongoing monitoring. If this is helpful so far, consider subscribing. I post content like this every day focused on evidence-based approaches to health, metabolism, performance, and longevity. Now, here's the key takeaway. Anorexia nervosa is not a lifestyle choice or a lack of knowledge about nutrition. It's a serious condition involving disruptions in brain function, reward processing, anxiety regulation, and metabolic physiology. Understanding that complexity is essential for both prevention and recovery. Now, let's discuss bulimia nervosa, a condition that is often hidden from friends, family members, and sometimes even healthcare providers. Unlike anorexia, where significant weight loss may be visible, bulimia frequently exists beneath the surface. Many individuals with bulimia maintain what appears to be a normal body weight. As a result, the disorder can go unnoticed for years. But internally, the body and brain are often caught in a cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to break. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Bulimia nervosa typically involves repeated episodes of binge eating followed by compensatory behaviors. These compensatory behaviors may include self-induced vomiting, excessive exercise, fasting, misuse of laxatives, or other attempts to prevent weight gain. The cycle often begins with restriction. This is a critical point. Many people assume binge eating is caused by a lack of discipline, but physiology tells a different story. When the body experiences prolonged restriction, powerful survival mechanisms activate. Hunger hormones increase. Food reward pathways become more sensitive. The brain begins prioritizing food acquisition. Energy conservation mechanisms intensify. The drive to eat becomes stronger. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine holding a beach ball underwater. At first, it seems manageable, but the longer you force it down, the greater the pressure becomes. Eventually, the ball explodes back toward the surface. Restriction often works similarly. The more aggressively food intake is suppressed, the stronger biological pressure can become. Eventually, that pressure may contribute to binge episodes. What the research shows is that binge episodes frequently occur in states of both physiological and psychological deprivation. The body is hungry, the brain is stressed, food becomes intensely rewarding. Large amounts of food may be consumed rapidly, often accompanied by feelings of loss of control. Afterward, intense guilt, shame, fear, or anxiety commonly emerge. This emotional distress often triggers compensatory behaviors, and those behaviors temporarily reduce anxiety. Unfortunately, that relief reinforces the cycle. The brain learns. Restriction leads to hunger, hunger leads to binging, binging leads to distress. Compensation temporarily reduces distress, then restriction begins again. Over time, the cycle becomes deeply ingrained. Now let's discuss the physiological consequences. Repeated vomiting can disrupt electrolyte balance. Potassium levels may decline. Heart rhythm abnormalities can develop. The esophagus can become damaged. Dental enamel may erode due to stomach acid exposure. Digestive function may become impaired, and chronic stress hormones often remain elevated. The body is repeatedly being pushed into a state of instability. Another important factor involves dopamine and reward pathways. Highly palatable foods, particularly combinations of sugar, fat, and salt, activate reward circuits powerfully. Following periods of restriction, those reward responses may become even stronger. This is one reason binge episodes can feel overwhelming and difficult to stop once they begin. Now let's discuss recovery. One of the most effective evidence-based approaches involves reducing restriction itself. This may seem counterintuitive. Many people believe they must become stricter after a binge, but increased restriction often strengthens the cycle. Instead, recovery typically focuses on restoring consistent eating patterns, improving emotional regulation skills, addressing body image concerns, and rebuilding trust in hunger and fullness signals. If this is helpful so far, consider subscribing. I post content like this every day focused on evidence-based tools for improving health, metabolism, performance, and longevity. Now, here's the key takeaway. Bulimia is not a failure of willpower. It's often a physiological and psychological cycle fueled by restriction, reward system activation, emotional distress, and learned behavioral patterns. Understanding that cycle is the first step toward breaking it. Now let's discuss the most common eating disorder worldwide, binge eating disorder, often referred to as BED. And unlike what many people assume, binge eating is not simply overeating. Everyone overeats occasionally. A holiday meal, a celebration, a vacation. That's normal human behavior. Binge eating disorder is different. It involves recurrent episodes of consuming unusually large amounts of food while experiencing a sense of loss of control. And importantly, these episodes are often accompanied by significant emotional distress. Here's what's really going on inside your body. The brain is constantly trying to balance energy needs, reward, stress, and survival. When these systems become disrupted, food can begin serving functions beyond nutrition. Food may become a source of comfort, a coping mechanism, a stress reliever, a distraction from difficult emotions, or a temporary escape from anxiety, loneliness, sadness, or overwhelm. This doesn't happen because someone lacks discipline. It happens because the brain is attempting to solve a problem. Unfortunately, the solution often creates new problems. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine stress is like pressure building inside a container. Healthy coping mechanisms gradually release that pressure. Exercise, sleep, social connection, mindfulness, recovery. But when those outlets are unavailable or insufficient, the brain may search for faster forms of relief. Highly palatable foods can provide that relief temporarily. For a short period, dopamine increases, pleasure increases, emotional discomfort decreases, the pressure feels lower, but once the episode ends, the original stress often remains. Sometimes it's even worse. And the cycle repeats. What the research shows is that binge eating disorder involves interactions between reward pathways, stress circuits, emotional regulation systems, and metabolic signaling. In many cases, chronic dieting contributes significantly. When the body repeatedly experiences restriction, biological drives to eat intensify. Hunger hormones rise, food reward increases. The brain becomes more focused on obtaining food. Eventually, overeating becomes more likely. This is why many individuals with binge eating disorder have extensive histories of dieting. The body is responding exactly as biology predicts. Now let's discuss stress. One of the strongest predictors of binge eating episodes is elevated stress. When cortisol remains chronically elevated, cravings for highly rewarding foods often increase. These foods provide rapid dopamine release and temporary emotional relief, but they do not address the underlying source of stress. This creates a pattern where food becomes emotional medicine. The challenge is that food was never designed to carry that responsibility. Another important factor involves sleep. Poor sleep significantly alters hunger and satiety hormones. Research consistently shows that sleep deprivation increases ghrelin, decreases leptin, increases cravings, and reduces impulse control. In other words, insufficient sleep can make binge eating more likely even when motivation remains unchanged. Now let's discuss recovery. One of the most effective approaches involves restoring regular eating patterns. Consistent meals, adequate protein, adequate calories, improved sleep, stress management, emotional awareness, and reducing the cycle of restriction and compensation. Many people are surprised to discover that eating more consistently often reduces binge frequency. But physiologically, this makes perfect sense. A nourished brain makes better decisions than a deprived brain. Now here's the key takeaway. Binge eating disorder is not simply about food. It's about the interaction between biology, stress, emotions, reward systems, and survival mechanisms. And understanding those mechanisms creates the foundation for lasting recovery. Now, let's discuss the most important topic of all, recovery. Because understanding anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating is valuable, but understanding how the brain and body heal is even more important. Recovery is not simply about changing eating behaviors. Recovery is about restoring biological balance, rebuilding trust between the brain and body, and allowing systems that have been under chronic stress to function normally again. Here's what's really going on inside your body. When eating patterns become disrupted for extended periods, the body adapts, the brain adapts, hormones adapt, metabolism adapts. Unfortunately, many of those adaptations are protective responses to perceived scarcity, stress, or instability. The body isn't trying to work against you. It's trying to keep you alive. The challenge is that those same survival mechanisms can maintain unhealthy patterns long after they stop being helpful. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your home experiences a severe winter storm. To survive, you close certain rooms, conserve energy, and operate in emergency mode. Those strategies make sense during the storm. But once conditions improve, continuing to operate in emergency mode creates new problems. Recovery works similarly. The body must learn that the emergency is over. Only then can normal function gradually return. What the research shows is that nutritional rehabilitation often produces improvements throughout multiple physiological systems simultaneously. As energy availability increases, the brain receives signals that resources are available again. Hormone production improves, stress responses become more balanced, sleep often improves, mood regulation improves, and cognitive flexibility increases. One of the most important hormones involved in this process is leptin. Leptin helps communicate energy availability to the brain. When energy intake remains chronically low, leptin levels often decline. The brain interprets this as a potential threat. Hunger increases, metabolic conservation increases, hormonal function may decline. As nutritional status improves, leptin signaling often improves as well. Now let's discuss cortisol. Chronic stress frequently accompanies eating disorders. Whether the source is food restriction, body image concerns, emotional distress, or physiological stress, elevated cortisol can make recovery more difficult. This is why recovery rarely focuses only on food. Stress management matters, sleep matters, relationships matter, mental health support matters. The nervous system must feel safe enough to stop operating in survival mode. Another important aspect of recovery involves rebuilding internal awareness. Many individuals with eating disorders lose confidence in hunger and fullness signals. Years of restriction, binging, compensation, or rigid food rules can weaken trust in the body's natural regulatory systems. Recovery often involves relearning how to recognize hunger, how to recognize satisfaction, how to tolerate discomfort, and how to respond to the body's signals without fear. This process takes time, but it is absolutely possible. Now let's discuss practical recovery principles. Consistent meal timing, adequate protein intake, sufficient total calories, regular sleep schedules, stress reduction practices, physical activity used to support health rather than punish the body, and developing flexible, not rigid nutrition habits. Now here's the key takeaway. Recovery is not about becoming perfect. Recovery is about helping the brain and body return to balance. And when that balance is restored, many of the biological drives that fuel eating disorders begin to lose their power. As we conclude, it's important to remember one fundamental truth. Eating disorders are not simply about food. They are conditions that involve the brain, the body, hormones, metabolism, emotions, behavior, and the complex relationship between all of them. And understanding that changes everything. Today, we've explored what healthy eating truly means. Not perfection, not restriction, and not constant control, but consistently providing the body with the energy and nutrients it needs to function optimally. We discussed how the brain regulates hunger, fullness, reward, and energy balance through an intricate network of hormones and neural circuits. These systems evolve to keep us alive. When they become disrupted, the relationship with food can become increasingly difficult and confusing. We then examined anorexia nervosa and how severe restriction affects nearly every physiological system in the body. We explored bulimia nervosa and the powerful cycle of restriction, binging, and compensation that can become deeply ingrained over time. And we discussed binge eating disorder, where food often becomes a temporary solution for stress, emotional discomfort, or biological deprivation. Throughout all of these conditions, one theme appears again and again. The body is not working against you. The body is trying to protect you. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Every craving, every hunger signal, every metabolic adaptation, every shift in hormones, every change in appetite. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of biology responding to its environment. The challenge is learning how to work with those biological systems rather than constantly fighting them. We also discussed recovery, and perhaps the most encouraging finding from decades of research is that the brain and body possess remarkable capacity for healing. Hormones can recover, metabolism can stabilize, hunger signals can normalize, food fears can diminish, and a healthy relationship with eating can be rebuilt. Recovery is not about becoming perfect. Recovery is about restoring trust. Trust in your body, trust in your hunger signals, trust in your ability to nourish yourself consistently and compassionately. So here's your challenge. Over the next 7 days, focus on one simple principle. Eat consistently, not perfectly, consistently. Pay attention to how your energy changes, how your mood changes, how your focus changes, and how your relationship with food begins to feel when nourishment becomes an act of support rather than control. Because long-term health is not built through extremes, it's built through sustainable habits that support both physical and mental well-being. If this video added value, like the video and subscribe to join others who are using science-based tools to optimize their health, metabolism, performance, and longevity naturally. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.